I have this book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. Now, in this book, this is a non-religious approach, and I'm going to weave it into why I'm telling you about this book in a second, how it fits to what we're talking about today. But this is a non-religious approach to help people deal with death and dying and thinking about fears about death and dying. So I have a section in here about NDEs, is one of the sections I have in here. But there's another section which we're going to talk more about today on reincarnation experiences, which is the topic of our discussion today. And most of what I'm going to talk about today is the details are not in my book because, you know, it would take a whole book talking about all the stuff that I'm going to talk about today and really in an expansive way. So I touch on it. I touch on it in that book. But those of you who may have read the book or heard the audio book or, you know, read the ebook or paperback version of the book will recognize some of the points that we're going to talk about today in the context of what I call the fourth belief system, reincarnation. So what are the other three beliefs, just real quick? First belief is the science belief. No afterlife. That's the science belief. No afterlife. The brain dies. The mind shuts off. That's the science belief. I call that belief system number one. I came up with these four belief systems. So I call that belief system number one. Belief system number two, belief in an afterlife, but some fear. I call it the fear of continued existence. So, and the fear could be due to many different things, but there's fear associated with it, the belief in the afterlife. The third belief system is belief in an afterlife. May call it heaven, nirvana, Valhalla, depends on the culture, you know, call it different things, but believe that the mind does continue. And when you remember, just a reminder, you know, I always mention this, and for those of you who saw my talk with you guys, whenever it was, Beverly, a couple of months ago or something, when you hear me use the word mind, you can substitute soul, spirit, consciousness, awareness. Same thing when I use the word mind, they're synonyms, okay, for the same thing. So third belief system, believe that the mind, soul, spirit, consciousness continues, but no fear, may even be looking forward to it, etc. Okay. Fourth belief system, reincarnation, past lives, future lives, soul contracts, all of that stuff. We're going to talk about that today. Okay, so we're going to focus on the fourth belief system as the way I define these belief systems, these non-religious belief systems about death and dying in my book. As Beverly mentioned, I have a second book coming out. It's not the sequel to this book. Those of you who've read this book, I talk about a sequel to this book. And I apologize to you who have been waiting for the sequel to come out because it's about 3/4 done. But that's going to be my third book. My second book is coming out, and it's called Marcus Aurelius Updated, 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. So that's coming out in March on Amazon, and it's going to be ebook and paperback version. And basically what it is a collection, a compilation of 67 essays that I've written on helping us live life more fully. So I've divided it into 4 chapters, 4 sections, you could call it: emotions, life principles, meditation, and the spiritual. So those are the 4 sections. Within those 4 sections, there's anywhere from, I think, 12 to 25 essays, depending on which section you're talking about. And I talk about different topics within those section topics from different perspectives. So that's coming out in March. If you want to look at the synopsis of it, the summary of it, you just go to my book website, which is kelvinhenrychin.com. It's the only .com website I have. kelvinhenrychin.com is my books. And so you can read a summary of all of the books that I have that are queued up. This one's done, and the manuscript is being uploaded by my book manager now into the software system. But there are several other books that I have that are all about 3/4 done. And you can read the summaries of them there. Okay, let's get into today's discussion. We're going to talk about reincarnation experiences. And let me just say, talk to you quickly from 100,000 foot. I'm going to start by weaving it and tying it in with NDEs and how do NDEs fit in with this whole notion of reincarnation and the big picture and so forth and so on. And where does it fit into the jigsaw puzzle of spiritual growth and spiritual development, NDEs, okay? But my objective in talking with you about reincarnation experiences, in addition to what I just said, is to give you glimpses into some of my experiences that stretch back about 6,000 years, my memories. But from a teaching standpoint, to give you a perspective and maybe some tips if you're curious about how you might open up your own memories. And some of you may not be interested in that, and that's totally okay too. But if you're curious, I'm going to give you some tips along the way that I kind of just learned by observing how they opened up in myself. All right. So a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking, if you know what that phrase means, you know, looking back after I've had the experience and how did that happen? And how did this one happen? And so forth. And I'll give you some tips and you may draw from that, you know, little processes yourself on how you might open up your own memories. Let me just say right at the outset, you don't need to understand or have any memories of your own past lives in order to fully develop from a spiritual self-development standpoint. You do not have to have access or memories, okay? So don't worry if you don't, and if you never have, and if you don't even in the future, don't worry about that. But we're going to talk about reincarnation in this context, first talking about NDEs. So how do NDEs, because I'm talking this way, obviously, because this is an IANDS group, right? And some of you have met me maybe when I spoke at the IANDS conference. Well, I spoke at both the one last August and I spoke at the one in August 2019 also in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. So take note of where that was located, in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. This will become interestingly useful information when we get into our discussion today. But first, let's start talking about NDEs and how do they fit into the big scheme of things, into our own personal illumination, our self-development journey that we're all on. So first of all, I always like to point out, and those of you who have had your own NDEs and have talked to other people who have had NDEs, you know this first point here, you know how true that is. They're not monolithic, meaning they are unique to each person. There's no one way. Monolithic means everything is the same way for everybody. No, it's not. It's the same way for everybody. It's unique to each person. And for example, I'm not going to give you the details of these three, but I'll just give you the quick summary point. As Beverly said, I almost drowned in 1972. So I had a near-death experience, but it was very different. I'll come back to mine in a second. It was very different from my friend Henry. Henry was a college classmate of mine. We were buddies in college. He had one in 1959-ish, around he was 8 years old or so. And he had an NDE, and you can read the details about it in my book, but he was on the ceiling. So you've heard about those kind of NDEs, right? He's up on the ceiling observing his little 8-year-old body hemorrhaging, all right? And he's completely out of his body, watching himself, completely at peace within himself, wondering why his mom's freaking out. Okay, and you and I know why his mom's freaking out. The little boy is dying on their living room rug. All right, and he remembers everything, being on the ceiling of the car when the doctor came. Those of you who are old enough like I am, you know, you remember the days when doctors actually did house calls in the United States. They'd show up at your house. Are you serious? You imagine them doing that today? You'd probably get a bill for $15,000 for them to come check your temperature today. But back then they did that. They carried their bag, you know, and they went around with their stethoscope and their bag of whatever they had in there and so forth. And, you know, they did house calls. Well, the doctor came and Henry was in the ceiling of the doctor's car because the doctor said he's lost too much blood. we cannot wait for the ambulance. So they took him, and he was on the ceiling of the surgery room, et cetera, et cetera. So you've heard NDEs like that. Jay's NDE in 2004, Jay, my friend Jay, and there's a long, it's about 4, 5, 6 pages long, the details of his NDE in my book. But just the summary point for you today is he was he's about 54 years old, Jay, Jay Peters, and he was in Seattle in a hospital, and he was in the excuse me, he was in the hospital, and he was all wired up, obviously monitored, and he flatlined. And in his NDE was different. He left his body and he's out in outer space, is the way he described it. Okay, so he wasn't like some of you may have had NDEs where you're literally on what I call the other side, and it's all lit up, and you may have been greeted by loved ones and so forth. Jay was greeted, but he said he was in outer space, and so he didn't kind of go all the way to the other side, but he was far enough. And then he came slamming back into his body, and he sat up, and the doctors and nurses all screamed. There were like 8 or 10 of them in the room, I guess. And they all screamed because he'd been dead for 20 minutes. Dead for 20 minutes. Those of you who are in healthcare, or maybe you've researched just yourself, you know 4 to 6 minutes is pretty much it, with no oxygen, no brain activity, et cetera. 4 to 6 minutes. I Googled it for my book, and I looked it up on the NIH website. And then if you come back, 99% of the time you get brain damage. You know, you get some, if you're on the 6 or 7 minute end of the 4 to 6 minutes. 20 minutes, Jay came back, and all of his allergies were gone. You guys may have had some experiences yourself like this, or I know you've heard about NDEs like that. But you see the breadth. These are very different. They're not monolithic. Very different. Mine was different. I drowned. I left my body and went right back in. Very quick. Mine happened in a split second. And if it had happened any longer, I would have drowned. I would not be here talking with you today, because I was probably already 4 feet down below the surface of the water going down, because I was so exhausted in this, right off of Torrey Pines Beach. I got pulled out by a rip current. You guys heard me talk about that last time we were together. So again, they're just one piece of what I call the million patch quilt of our eternal journey, NDEs. So they do give us a glimpse, absolutely. So it's not nothing. Those who've had experience, you know, it's not nothing. It's something, but it gives us a glimpse into this huge tapestry of our spiritual journey, right? And so they show us this obviously. They show us that we're more than our physical bodies. And as I said, gives us a glimpse. They're just the tip of the iceberg of the range of spiritual experiences that we can have. So again, just a quick overview. You may remember this from my the last talk, but just very briefly. You know, I learned to meditate when I was a teenager. I learned to teach meditation in the early 1970s, and I've been teaching meditation ever since. I've taught thousands, north of 5,000 people. I don't know, many thousands of people, 46 countries now. I just went up to 46 countries. And I teach like this on Zoom. About 6 years into my meditation, every day, twice a day meditation, I opened up. That's when my reincarnation memory started opening up. All right. And so, we'll get into that in greater detail in a minute. Then in the mid 80s, I opened up and just spontaneously, just like the reincarnation experience is completely spontaneous. I've never had a past life regression or anything like that. I have nothing against them, but I don't need to. It just, I have too much material already to deal with. But in the mid 80s, again, spontaneously opened up to the other side, started getting communications from the other side. So again, NDEs are just a tip of the iceberg is my point, right? Can unfold, help us unfold to much more vast, the whole huge array, the range of possible experiences that we can have. And then today, what we're going to talk about is what happens after the afterlife. So we're going to, just to kind of think about it from a linear fashion, you know, we're going to talk about after the afterlife. The last time I think we were together, we talked about the afterlife, what's it like, da, 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 da. Now we're going to talk about what about after the afterlife? What about after you're in heaven? Can you come back? Yes, you can. And do you have to? No, you don't. So it's optional. This is not a punishment. Oh, you got to go back and you got to learn more and you got to resolve this relationship. If you want to resolve the relationship, you may, but it's a choice. Nobody is telling you that you got to go back. And now, let me reframe that. There may be friends and loved ones and old spiritual teachers on the other side telling you should go back, but that doesn't mean you have to go back. That's what I mean. There's not a structural mechanism in spirituality that makes you go back. You may get influenced by an old teacher you run into on the other side who says go back, but that's up to you. You get it, you decide, you know? So you don't have to, is what I'm saying structurally. And then soul contracts, yeah, that all comes after the afterlife, right? Coming up with contracts or agreements or soul plans. Sometimes people call it that. Afterwards, while you're in the afterlife, before you come in and are birthed into a new physical biological body. Okay? How can we access this? So again, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the reincarnation experiences themselves, let's just talk very, very briefly about, because people ask me, well, how can I open up? What's the best thing to do to open up? Well, as I said earlier, I'm going to give you some tips along the way in the context of various experiences that I'm going to bring up. But the best single thing that you can do to open up, whether it's to your reincarnation memories or whether it's to communicating with the other side, is meditation, right? Because that is what gets us in touch with ourselves. And we have to be grounded and foundationally firm within ourselves to get out there and communicate with the other side, or to access our memories if we want to, et cetera, and reduce our stress and strain and so forth, because that's what creates barriers. And so you've heard me already talk another time. You read this screen. It's very simple. You know, I've been meditating for a long time, basically is the summary of that screen, okay? And that handsome young man there, if you don't recognize him, that is me with a full head of hair with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in May 1973 in Lantia, Spain. So that was about, so he taught the Beatles to meditate in 1968. February 1968 is when the Beatles were with him in India. So I'm with him in Spain here, where I learned to teach TM back then. As many of you already heard me say, I moved away from the organization after 10 years when they went in a different direction. But what is any form of meditation? Whether you do mine, you do some other form of meditation, it doesn't matter what the technique is. That's what every meditation technique really is all about. It's about allowing our mind to experience itself, knowing more about who we are, know thyself. To me, those two phrases at the bottom there, that sums up spirituality in two phrases. That's it in a nutshell. How you may get there and how it may get colored in different ways. You may use different labels, but it's essentially this. That's what spirituality is all about. Knowing more about who we are and expanding our conscious capacity for experience is another way of saying the same thing. And those are the benefits of it. And the last one, let's talk about the last one, about our memories opening up. So what about past lives and reincarnation? First, let's talk about memory in general. So I'm gonna gradually get into the reincarnation stuff, but first let's just talk about memory in general. And first, let's talk about memory this lifetime. Ask yourself, this is the first tip that I'm giving you now in terms of accessing your own past life memories. Ask yourself, what are your first memories in this lifetime? First, I suggest that my students deal with what they are aware of. They do have ready access to, readily accessible, is their own memories this lifetime. How far back do they go for you? For me, can't see, that's a picture of me and my mom when I was a young little toddler, little bit older than a toddler. So that's the youngest one I could find to put on the slide. But when I was around a year and a half to 2 years old, that's my first memory. And my first memory, and you see it says Korean War, is around the time when my father was almost getting called up to go to the Korean War because he was in the US Air Force Reserves. So reserves means he's kind of waiting, you know, he's the last group to go. They take all the active people first, right? Well, he was in the Second World War, active duty. And now in 1952, he's in the US Air Force Reserves. Well, I remember explicitly and I've corroborated this with my mom before she died, this memory that I had in this house that I grew up in, only from 0 to 4.5 years old. Never been in the house since then. And then we moved to a different town, different house, obviously. So I described the house, how the layout of the house was. I described to her where their bedroom was in the back right corner of the house, facing the backyard. And I described me kneeling down or playing on the floor or something at the foot of my parents' bed. And my mom was in there. Maybe she was folding laundry. I can't remember that detail. But she was in there with me when my dad came home from work, from Raytheon. He worked for Raytheon as an engineer, and he was really upset because he had just heard from the US Air Force Reserves that he might have to go off and fight in the Korean War. And so that memory I have is the tension and the emotion, how emotionally upset my parents were. And that is probably why it's my first memory, because of the emotional tension that imprinted in my consciousness, right? And so I'm telling you this also to give you another tip. When you have experiences, whether they're past life memories and you're not sure if they're past life memories, you're not sure if you're making it up, and you'll see, I'm going to tell you some very candid stories about my stuff where I had that doubt and so forth. How do you corroborate it? And so here's an example. The Korean War. That's why I put the dates of what the beginning and the end of the Korean War was. Well, I know if this experience, which I corroborated with my mother, that is a memory that I had, and I told her the layout of the house. I hadn't been in the house since I was 4.5 years old. So I told my mom maybe 10 years later, when I was a teenager, said, Mom, I got this memory, and here's the house. Was the house like this? And she said, yeah, that your memory of the house is exactly right. And I said, I remember this thing when Dad came home. Bob, did that happen? She said, yep, that happened. Well, it happened during that time period because that's when the Korean War was. So what's my tip to you? My tip is to look for outside world events or local events or whatever that you can corroborate and narrow down the time frame you see that you may have of a memory, whether it's of this lifetime or another lifetime. Okay, that's a little tip for you. So again, start with this lifetime. See if you can see how far back you can go. Because I have a sister-in-law, she can't remember anything before 10 years old. For whatever reason, she has blocked it out. Now we know from her sisters and my ex-wife that she was alive for those first 10 years and she was doing stuff, and other people remember. She has no memory before 10 years old. So see how far back, as an exercise, you can start opening up your own stuff. That's a first step, I suggest. Here's a term that I came up with. Maybe somebody else uses the term too, but I came up with this term, recognition memories. And are they precursors to our reincarnation, our actual past life memories? So let's start with this idea of déjà vu. Many of you have heard the phrase before. You know, it's that experience. It's a phrase that describes that experience where, you know, Beverly and I are maybe sitting there having a cup of tea somewhere, and we go, Beverly. I go, Beverly, you know, it feels like we were here before. I mean, I just had this déjà vu, this weird experience or this weird feeling. It's like, I've had this conversation with you before, right here in the same place, you know? And so people will have that kind of experience, right? Well, what I'm saying, an even more powerful level of déjà vu experiences, I call them recognition memories. So for example, some of you may probably have had this experience where you go to a place and you go to, let's say, South Dakota, and you've never been to South Dakota before, and that's, you can factually, you can check in with your parents or your siblings or your whoever's, and you say, have I ever been to South Dakota? No, we've never been to South Dakota, and yet you go there for the first time and you go, I've been here before. I know I've been here before. And it's not one of the fleeting déjà vu experiences, which can be kind of potentially chemically, justified from a scientific standpoint. You have these other memories or experiences. You don't know if they're memories yet, but experience of being in South Dakota. Or I have a friend who flew to London for the first time, and she at the time, this was some decades ago, when she was in her 20s, she was the highest paid model in Europe, fashion model in Europe, and she's from Texas. And she'd never left this little town, Texas, except she went to New York and she was signed by whatever, Ford, modeling agency, I can't remember which one, but one of the big ones. And they got a gig for her and she went to London, she flew in, she knew she'd been in London before. That kind of experience, all right? Are they precursors? Okay? So they could be places or they could be things. So here's an example of things, recognition memories. So this has happened to me when I was 5 to 9 years old. My mother, those of you who've read my book, I tell some stories about my mom in a nutshell. My mom was a really unusual woman. She was 5'0" tall, 5 foot tall, literally 5 foot 0 inches. But she was a huge woman. She had a huge personality, and she was a Renaissance woman. Chemistry major at Boston University, #1 Fuller Brush salesperson in the state of Massachusetts for decades. If you know what Fuller Brush is, back, it still exists, but, going door to door, selling stuff, and she was also an artist. And she had a display, she actually had a display of her abstract art at the Museum of Fine Arts once, just as an amateur artist. When I was 5 years old, my mom used to take me to the Museum of Fine Arts. And we would be there at 9 o'clock, 8:45, let's say it opened at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, 8:45, we're there at 8:45, standing outside. Those of you who are from Boston or have been to the Museum of Fine Arts, right next to that statue of the Indian who's like this on the horse, right there, this big, huge statue right there at the front door. Yeah, you seen that, Hashi? Yeah. So yeah, he's like this, exactly. And so, standing right there, waiting for the museum to open. Probably twice a month we would go, at least once a month, but very frequently, regularly, because my grandmother lived across the street, like 5 blocks across the street in an apartment. So we would bring my little sister there, and my grandmother would get to see my little sister, and she'd babysit. My dad would go off and do whatever dads do then. My dad was a car guy, so checking out a new hubcap for his car or something. I don't know. So, but my mom and I would go to the Museum of Fine Arts. And we'd be standing, waiting out there with a few other people. Museums back then, this is the 1950s. They were not popular places to go like they are now. You go wait outside the museum, it's like a zillion people, there's busloads of people. Back then, it's like, I don't know, my mom and me and 3 or 4 other people. When the museum opened on a Saturday morning, nobody. My mom would take me, and in the lobby, she would say, Kel, look at your Mickey Mouse watch. When Mickey's hand, his little arm is on the 11 and his big arm is on the 12, I'll meet you right back here in the lobby. See you later. You imagine doing that? Those of you who have young children, I mean, your kids would end up in social services department of your city or your state, right? So I would go off 5 years old. You imagine your 5, 6, 7-year-old doing that with your kid? It was like a different time. And I would just go off, and that's where I went. Egyptian mummies and the medieval armor. That's where I went. My mom would go off and look at paintings, I don't know what, and then I'd meet her back at 11 o'clock, 2 hours later. Why did I go there? I don't know. Now I know. I didn't know then why I went, But when I went and I hung out with 3,500 or 4,000-year-old bags of dust, you know, otherwise known as a mummy, you know, I felt like I was at home emotionally. So this is another tip for you. Look for what's the emotional draw, the emotional resonance that's like inexplicable. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, you know, what mummies? I don't know. I studied mummies. You know, I was 5 years old. I was hardly reading. You know, I was reading like children's books. You know, and hang out with the medieval armor. Okay, that's where I'd go every single time. Recognition memory. That's what I call it now. I didn't know what it was then. I would just go there. You know, when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. Age 20. This happened to me when I was 20 years old. More a location kind of issue like we talked about earlier. I went to the Catacombs via Appia means, it's Latin, it just means Appian Way, okay? Outside Rome, Italy. And those of you who've ever been to Rome, you've probably been to the Catacombs because it's like a tourist track, you know, place to go. Now they have bus loads of people drive up. When I was there, I was 20 years old, 1971. Literally, we took a cab there. I was traveling. I was studying abroad in France. I was a French major. And so my buddies and I said, let's meet up, you know, a couple of weeks before, 10 days before the semester starts, and let's travel around a little bit. So they'd already, they were rich kids. I was like a regular working class kid, you know, from a suburb of Boston, you know, the working class family. You know, these guys were well, you know, one of them had lived in Paris, blah, blah, blah. So they already knew. They'd already been to the, you know, Rome before. It was, let's go down to Rome and go to the catacombs, check it out. Kelly, you've never been there before. Yeah, I said, cool. So we go down there, and that's a church that's above one of the main catacombs there. There's a whole bunch of catacombs. There's 3 or 4, maybe 3 to 5 really, really like main ones that most people go to. There's more than that, but they're the main ones. And one of them, I'm not sure if it's the one we went to, but one of them has 10 miles of tunnels. So the bottom picture is like you're in a catacomb. It's a labyrinth of tunnels under the ground, anywhere from 20, 30, 40, 50, 75 feet under the ground. And 10 miles, can you imagine? One of them is 10 miles of tunnels. And one of them has 500,000 bodies. 500,000 in one of the catacombs. And so see the carvings in the right, that's where the bodies are put, because obviously you're not going to put them under your feet because you're walking through tunnels. They're in the walls. And so the Etruscans first started building the tunnels before Rome existed. And then the Romans took it over. And then these are outside the city limits because it was illegal in ancient Rome to bury people within the city limits. Why? Obviously for sanitation reasons. So the Appian Way is, I don't know, it's a few miles outside the walls of Rome. So I go in there. The point of this, recognition memory, that's the context we're talking about here. I go in there and I come out, and you've ever had that experience where in life, it doesn't matter where, but you just like, how much time just passed? You have no idea, right? So I was in there. I came out with my 2 buddies, and there were only like a half a dozen of us on the tour, very, very small tour. I came out and said, man, I just feel like I was in a time warp. Like, how long? It felt like it could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 105 minutes. I had no idea. And I asked my buddy David, and he checked his watch. He said 25 minutes we were in there. I said, wow. And then that, along with the knowingness that I had been there before. Knowingness. When you hear me use the phrase knowingness, because I'm going to use this again in some of the other experiences I'll tell you about. Knowingness. It's like, how do you know Beverly, Asha, and whoever else I can't see, Rosary, how do you know that you're on a Zoom call right now? Do you have to go knock on your neighbor's door and come? Could you please come over and just tell me like what I'm doing right now? No, it's just a knowingness. You know you're on a Zoom call right now. That's what I mean when you hear me use the phrase knowingness. I just knew that I'd been in the catacombs before. And I know that I'd never been to Europe before. That was the first time I flew on a jet airplane. Never mind go anywhere, never mind go to Europe. So another recognition memory. I'm giving you kind of a range because these recognition memories can come in different forms. This is one about things, unusual things that a friend of mine, Josephine, has this recognition memory about. She still has it. But it was about jewelry. And I said, well, what I suggested to her, so here's another tip for you. I said, follow the breadcrumbs, Josephine. Follow the breadcrumbs. What do I mean by that? Well, she said, what did she told me? I got this thing about this weird jewelry. I don't know. And I said, what do you mean weird? She said, well, it's like they don't make it today. I've looked for it. I can't find them anywhere because I want to buy some. But I just I can't find anybody who has them. And I said, well, do you have a picture in your mind of what it looks like? She goes, yeah. I said, well, go online. Now you got the internet. Go online and surf around and see if you can find pictures of it, and then find out where it's from and when it's from and so forth. There you go. That's a picture she sent me, and that is jewelry made in first and second century Egypt, sold in second century Rome. Okay, that's where that's from. So she identified it by, again, following my tip of following the breadcrumbs. All right. This is when the floodgates opened up of my reincarnation memories. 1977 to 79, and they've continued since. But I just had like a gazillion opened up very quickly in over a 2-year period. Note the order that they surfaced there. You see, it's not chronological, really. I mean, some of it is and some of it isn't. It's a little bit all over the map. And so again, that's another tip for you. Don't expect that, oh, well, I have this memory from the 1800s, so I should be able to get a memory from the 1900s now. Not necessarily. You may have a memory from the 1800s and then have a memory from, I don't know what, 1,000 years ago, the 900s or whatever. It's just, it's just like, think about it this way. Remember when I talked to you last time, I said there's less difference between this side and the other side than we realize? Well, it's the same thing with memory in a sense. There's less difference between how we remember stuff in this lifetime than how we remember stuff from other lifetimes. It's all over the place, isn't it? You think about it. Do you remember, if you think about your life right now, do you automatically, it just like random stuff pops up, assuming you're not trying to remember things chronologically. If you just think about your life openly like that, random stuff will pop up from when you were a kid, from what you did last week, from what happened 5 years ago, from what, again, back to something when you were 20 years old or whatever. It just, that's the way memories are, right? So why should our reincarnation memories be any different? Because they're memories coming from our mind. It's the way our mind operates, no differently, okay? So I'm going to come back to some of these. I'm going to give you some detail on some of those, not all of them. So my memories go back about 4,000 BC is the oldest one. So that's about 6,000 years ago. I'm going to talk about some of these in a few minutes. Just a selection. I have about 24 lifetimes. That's just some of them. I just put some of them there. I didn't put all of them. But 24 lifetimes of memories that stretch back as far as 6,000 years, as you can see, 4,000 BC. Sumeria is where that one's from. I was a businessman in Sumeria. I wasn't, not a famous person that I know of anyway. Sumerian business person, 6,000 years ago. But I have some explicit memories from that, etc. So just some smatterings of stuff from different lifetimes. We'll talk about this as we continue. Here's some other examples. My daughter, Sam. My daughter, I call her Sammy, Samantha. Sam, my daughter had this memory, and I say this to you not only for yourself, but also for your children. So if those of you who have children, who may start surfacing memories, and especially if you have any of you have any younger children or younger grandchildren who may start surfacing memories. I'll give you this as an example. My daughter, who's 26 years old now, she didn't tell us this. She didn't tell us this till about 5 or 6 years ago, that the oldest memory she has this lifetime is being in a dust storm, walking along a wooden cart, next to a wooden cart, holding an adult's hand. She's always assumed that this was from this lifetime because she was born in Las Vegas, Nevada. And those of you who know Las Vegas, Nevada, it's in the desert, right? Could you have dust storms in Las Vegas, Nevada? Absolutely, yes. So she always thought it was from this lifetime. Well, we said, honey, it's just, like I said, she's had this memory since she was 2 or 3 years old, she said. But she just told us this recently. She was about 19 or 20 years old. And we said, honey, that first of all, that would have been terrible parenting. Taking a 2-year-old out into a dust storm, walking, holding their hand. Terrible parenting, number one. Number two, we moved from Las Vegas to Los Angeles when you were 6 months old. You weren't walking yet, all right? So it couldn't have been us with you. It wouldn't. We know. We never took you in a dust storm. We wouldn't, but you weren't even walking. So again, outside corroborative facts, right? What are the facts here? She wasn't walking. It didn't happen. It couldn't have happened in Las Vegas, and it never happened with us. So she has since opened up more and had more of this experience, and it's from a long time ago, not exactly sure when, but probably, we don't know, 500 to 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. In other words, a long time ago. She was in a dust storm, okay? Josephine and Lucius. Josephine and Lucius, my friend Josephine, had an experience from a dream. And so again, this is another tip for you from a teaching standpoint. These things can come up in dreams. She had a memory that comes up it's in greater detail in my book. And we can come back to this if we have time at the end of our discussion, if you're curious about the details on that. University of Virginia Medical School, I encourage you to Google the University of Virginia Medical School. If you're not aware, they have been collecting they have case studies, they've been collecting information and have cases, close to 3,000 case studies of children aged 2 to 5 years old. Most of them are around 2 to 5 years old. Some of them are a little bit older, but 2 to 5 years old, where it's clearly not from this lifetime, memories. And so just Google University of Virginia Medical School later, type in reincarnation or past lives into the search window, and it'll take you to the department in that medical school. It's been around since the department was founded in 1967. It's been around a long, long time, okay? Children with scars and birthmarks. Some of you may have heard these kind of about stories and situations where a child tragically dies, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, whatever. And in that time, while they're on planet Earth, obviously, they fall, whatever, they get a scar, and they have a scar in their arm or their shoulder, their leg, whatever. And from the injury, they get reborn, and they choose based on, they have choice. We have choice, as I said, on the other side. They choose to come back to the same family. And so 9 months later, the mother's pregnant, gives birth. I mean, and then, gives birth 9 months later, you know what I mean? I messed up the timing there. But, gives birth, and birthmarks in the exact same location, in the exact same shape. Not only that, but the personality of the newborns, the young toddler children, same likes, dislikes about food, same Disney movie likes and dislikes, same personality, okay? So seemingly pretty unusual evidence of probable reincarnation, right? You can't say absolutely for sure, but how else do you explain it, Okay? So here's how my first past life memory surfaced. And again, just from a teaching example, to give you an example of, I'll give you some details of how this surfaced for me. It could be similar, it could be very different for you. We're all unique, we don't know, right? They can surface in many, many different ways, and you'll see as we get into some of the future slides today together. But here's what happened with me. In 1977, I had a dream. I just had I almost said regular dream, but it wasn't a regular dream, but it was a dream that was really, really lucid, very crystal clear. And what was not regular about the dream was how emotional I was in the dream. Now, I've had lots of dreams in my 70 years here on the planet, and I have lots of lucid dreams, lots of very clear dreaming. But the emotional power of this dream in 1977 was off the charts. And I was incredibly upset, distraught in this dream, seeing myself lying off in a ditch on the side of the road. That's all I had. Okay, that's all. I didn't know it was a past life anything. To me, it was just a dream. Okay, at this point. So again, from a teaching example, do what I didn't do. I'm suggesting that you do what I didn't do, which is keep a journal, write these things down. I thought, it's just a dream, whatever. So fast forward about 6 or 7 months, I'm in Switzerland on a meditation retreat with a bunch of TM teachers back then, okay? And we're meditating all day, every day, and so forth. We're in this hotel. It's called the Hotel Berghof in Wilderswil, Switzerland, outside Interlaken. Beautiful area, gorgeous. If those of you who've ever, been there, you know what I'm talking about. The Jungfrau and the Eiger Mountains are right there, et cetera, et cetera. It's just unbelievable. But, we see it every once in a while when we're outside walking after lunch. Most of the time, we're not seeing it because our eyes are closed. We're sitting in the hotel meditating all day. So we're in this dining room. Picture a dining room with no furniture, a hotel dining room, big hotel dining room, no furniture, because they've removed all the furniture and it's just wall-to-wall pieces of foam, twin mattress with, twin sheets on them, wall-to-wall foam, because why? We're all 75 of us guys. We're going to sit in there, and it's separated the men and the women. So we're in a male hotel, obviously, and sitting there, group meditations. So we're doing group meditations every day, and for like 2 months straight. And somewhere in the first month, at some point, in these group meditations, people are getting energy rushes. You know what Kundalini is? Energy rushes, just getting, and you don't have to know what Kundalini is, but if you do, you know what I'm talking about. You get these powerful energy rushes going up through the body, just spontaneously during the meditation. Okay, that was happening, and then I don't usually say this, Rosary, in our meditation class because I want to freak people out. But what happened to me is my body spontaneously flipped over on its back. I flipped over on my back, and I was being crucified. And so I knew I was going through a crucifixion experience. And it was very painful. And I had all the visual and the emotional and everything, the sensory. So I had all the senses going in this experience. And it was happening every time. It went on for weeks, every time. And so one day, after a couple of weeks of this going on with me, everybody else is sitting there and they're hopping around, or, they're hopping on the foam. They look like frogs, they're hopping around, they're getting these energy rushes, and I'm like on my back. So after a couple of weeks of this, my friend George Hammond and I, we all paired up, because we look after each other, make sure everybody's good. Nobody needs any special attention. Everybody's, feeling really, stable and strong and all that good stuff. So we all go pair up every day, and we go out for a walk after lunch because, you got to get some exercise. You're doing yoga positions and meditating all day, every day. 2 months straight. We're not cooking. We don't have any appointments. Just people are cooking they're cooks in the hotel cooking vegetarian meals for us and so forth. George and I are off walking. We're walking up behind the Hotel Berghof into this pastoral, beautiful setting. The cows are grazing. It's about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon after lunch. And we're alone and walking up this path towards the forest. And I say, George, I had this dream, this really powerful dream. I said something like that to him about 6-8 months ago or something. And he goes, yeah. And you were on the side of the road and you were crying and da-da-da. And I got really emotional. I'm starting to get emotional right now. And I said, how did you know? I didn't even tell him the details. I said, how did you know that? He says, because I found you. And I said, what do you mean you found me? He said, I found you. 2,000 years ago, I found you. You've been saying you've been getting crucified for the last 2 weeks in the group meditations. You're flipped over in your back. You know who that's happened to? And I said, no. And so then he started mentioning, that to me and opened up my memories and so forth. And then everything started flooding into me. So I have these memories of being with Jesus and so forth, and conversations and all kinds of stuff that goes along with that. And then right after that, my Crusader memory opened up, maybe within 6 months or 3 or 4 months of that, because this was 1977, November, my first experience. So sometime in January, February 1978, I have this Crusader memory. Maybe it was actually March or April, 78, my Crusader memory opened up. And so the context from a teaching example is when did this happen? It wasn't during my meditation. It wasn't during sleep. It was while I was lying down resting after meditating. So I always recommend to my meditation students that they rest a little bit for a few minutes, 10 minutes, after or longer, after they meditate. Don't just get up right after. So I suggest that to all of you who don't do my technique. You should always have a rest period afterwards, because you could cancel out the benefits of your meditation. Well, that makes no sense, right? Because too much contrast. You want a transition period. So I'm in my transition period, we'll call it, lying down after I meditated. So I'm not meditating, I'm not dreaming, I'm not sleeping, and I'm not fully wide awake. I'm in that in-between state. That in-between state, for those of you who don't meditate, that in-between state right before you go to sleep at night, you're lying in bed, you're relaxed, the lights are off, but you haven't gone to sleep, you conked out yet. That in-between state, you start slipping into. I'm in that state, okay? For those of you who don't meditate, okay? I'm in that state. And all of a sudden, the TV screen goes on in my mind. And here's what I see. I see, you've had, those of you who've had experiences in your dreams, for example, where you see stuff in your dreams because you can see through your eyes, or it's like you have a camera on your head or something like that, but you can't see yourself, right? You can see around in your dream. So I'm having that experience. I walk into this stone room, big, huge stone blocks, like this big, floor, wall, ceiling, and I scuba dive. So I can tell vertical height pretty easily just by looking at it approximately. And the ceiling is about 40, 50 feet high, way up, 40, 50 foot high stone ceiling. I'm in this room alone. There's nobody else in there. And all the furniture is pushed to the walls. I walk in, except there's one piece of furniture in the middle of the room, a full-length mirror. Full-length mirror. I go up to the full-length mirror. I see myself. I'd never had that experience before, seeing myself in a vision or a dream or anything. And this was not dreaming. This was just in that in-between waking state. I see myself, and what do I see? I see this really big guy. I didn't know at that point how big. Later, I find out I had a knowingness about how big I was. At this point, I just looked huge because I fill up the whole mirror. And I have long reddish hair and a reddish beard. And I have full-length chainmail on with a white tunic and a cross on it. And I was a crusader. And when I had that experience, as soon as I saw myself, I had that knowingness experience that we talked about earlier. How do you know you're on a Zoom call? You just know you. I had that experience. How do I know that that's me? I just had that knowingness. But then immediately I had doubt went through me, like doubt, like just, I didn't even have a thought. I just had the feeling of doubt that I was me. And then a split second later, I had this energy go through my body, went from my feet up through my legs, the torso, shot out my head like a fire hose of energy, just shot through me, really powerful with knowingness. So it went knowingness, doubt, knowingness in a split second. That was my experience when I saw myself in the mirror. And then I just relaxed, and then over the years, floodgates opened up of memories from that. I'm eating animals I've never eaten before. What it feels like to be starving. I mean, really starving, not having eaten for, a week, 2 weeks, what it feels like to wield a sword that's really heavy. And I still have muscle memory from that, what that feels like. And so I have all these, so that's another tip for you. How can you tell if it's just your imagination, people will sometimes ask me, versus an actual memory? The more, and you can never tell for sure, bottom line, but the more emotion and the more mixture of all different senses, the more real life it is, the more likely it is from a past life experience. And those are some of my other memories that I've had. But in what you can see there is a range of, perhaps known people and perhaps really unknown. I don't know who I was as when I was a Buddhist monk several times. I was a woman at least once. I don't know how many times, but, I have a memory of being a woman. And Egyptian priests, I don't know which ones, but this is when they surfaced in the 20th century in my WW2, World War II fighter pilot. I died in around 1942 after the Battle of Midway, etc. Okay, I'm going to talk about two of these lifetimes here in this context. I want to give you an example of an interconnection across lifetimes. And I'm going to give you another example of how you can potentially somewhat, because nothing is absolute, but somewhat corroborate externally the connections amongst the lifetimes, okay? So, and this interconnection, this connection between these two lifetimes is a lifetime from 160 AD and another lifetime from around 1760-ish. I was born 1721, died in 1786. So we'll just pick 1760 as a midpoint of that lifetime. What happened to me was in 1999, the movie Gladiator came out. Russell Crowe starred in that. Joaquin Phoenix played his son Commodus. Not his son, played the son of Marcus Aurelius, Commodus, who in real life, Commodus, in fact, had the personality that the Joaquin Phoenix character had. He was really crazy and cruel. But he did not kill his father. He did not kill Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius died, they think, of smallpox of some sort. So Ridley Scott, the producer-director of the movie Gladiator, he fictionalized that part of it. But when I went to see the movie, so what happened was, quick story. So what happened was I wanted to go see the movie. I just knew that viscerally I needed to see this movie for some reason. And I said to my wife at the time, I said, hey, you want to go see the movie? She says, nah, I'm not interested in it. She'd seen the trailer and stuff. And I said to my son, Jesse, who was about 10, 11 years old at the time, you want to go? He said, nah, not really, Dad. And then my daughter, now if you remember, those of you who are really quick are doing the math, and you're going, my daughter said, yeah, Daddy, I'll go. I want to go see that movie. I've seen the trailer. How old was she in 1999? She was in kindergarten. So those of you who see the movie are guys shaking your head as a parent, and I got a lot of head shaking at me that Monday morning when we went to school, and Sammy's going, I saw the movie Gladiator with my daddy on Saturday. His parents are looking at me like bad parent eyes. Like, well, you took your 5-year-old daughter to see Gladiator? Yeah, she wanted to see it. And the interesting thing is that she doesn't remember, or she remembers, but she wasn't affected so much by the blood and everything. She felt at home in ancient Rome. So since then, she and I have connected the dots. She's had a couple of lifetimes, at least a couple, maybe more, in ancient Rome and so on and so on. I went there to the movie with her, when the Marcus Aurelius character pops up on the screen, I saw the character and I knew I'd been Marcus Aurelius. I had that knowingness. And then I start reading about Marcus Aurelius, which is another tip for you. If you have any inklings about time period or even personality, you go look up that time period and you see if the personality seems to fit with what your personality is today. Because as you may remember, I may have touched on this the first time we talked a few months ago, that personality continues, it persists from lifetime to lifetime, and it doesn't change that drastically very quickly. It changes very slowly. It does change. It can change, but you can make changes, but tend to be very slow changes because of the emotional patterns being so deeply imprinted in our consciousness. So I looked up Marcus Aurelius. I start reading about personality, and I start reading. Actually, there's some stuff in my new book that's coming out in March that I did not know that he wrote about, that I've written about separately in this lifetime. And so there's a chapter in my book, which you'll see kind of highlights some of that. But here's the interconnection across these two lifetimes. The 160 AD is when Marcus Aurelius, as I said, lived, and Frederick the Great. So I'm following the breadcrumbs. Remember that tip I've given you. Follow the breadcrumbs. I'm following the breadcrumbs. Now I have, fast forward, in 2014, I went to the library and I have this Marcus Aurelius biography. Buried in the back of the biography, this 2-inch thick biography, is a short chapter that outlines people through history who have respected and revered Marcus Aurelius, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius from the 2nd century. And remember, what did I tell you back here? I don't know if you remember, here in 1979, I had this knowingness that I had been a king of Prussia. I didn't know where Prussia was. I didn't think I was going to be talking about my past life memories. The only person I talked about my past life memories with when the floodgate opened up was my friend George, because his floodgate opened up about 2 or 3 years before mine. And so we would talk about it, and he said, yeah, it's cocktail party talk. We don't need to talk about it with people. I didn't think about it as a teaching tool until recently, like in the last 5 years or so. So I knew I had been a king of Prussia. So I didn't even bother, because I never thought I was going to be thinking much about it anymore, unless it popped up automatically. I didn't even know where Prussia was. I knew what Prussia had some relationship to Germany. I knew it was somewhere in Europe, but I didn't know exactly where or when. I don't know if it was First World War or was it before then. I didn't know. So that King of Prussia knowingness had persisted since 1979. It kept popping up in my mind every once in a while. I'm thinking about that. I'm getting more memories from it. Now I'm thinking, I can see clothing and stuff, but I'm not researching it until 2014. I have this Marcus Aurelius biography, and in the back, that in the book, buried in the back, is this chapter, and he talks about this King of Prussia who modeled his life after Marcus Aurelius. That got my attention. A King of Prussia modeled his life after Marcus Aurelius. Who is this guy? And it's Frederick II and his Frederick's citizens, the people of Prussia. The Prussians call him Frederick the Great because he created a lot of good social structure, and he was very religiously tolerant and so forth and so on, and the population, and et cetera, a lot of religious freedoms and so forth. So we call him Frederick the Great, and he created a good, safe taxation system, et cetera, et cetera. So they call him Frederick the Great. So now I start looking up, I'm following breadcrumbs. I'm reading about this guy, Frederick the Great. And it turns out the memories that I have of the clothing match the time period when he lived, 1721 to 1786. And not only that, but I start reading and I find out that he convened a group of 11 friends. So there were 12 of them when he was a young prince at his first palace called Rheinsberg. And what would they talk about? Greek and Roman philosophy. Greek and Roman philosophy. This is Frederick the Great, who modeled his life after Marcus Aurelius. That's what that quote is on all the biographies about Frederick the Great. He, quote, modeled his life after Marcus Aurelius. And at his first palace, Rheinsberg, he convened his small group of friends. They would talk about Greek and Roman philosophy and other topics, music and so forth. And he renamed the small group, they called it Remusburg. They called, instead of calling his palace Rheinsberg, they renamed it Remusburg. Those of you who know the history of Rome know that Rome, Romulus and Remus, two brothers, had a fraternal squabble and Romulus killed Remus. That's why Rome is named Rome after Romulus, and it's not named Remus or Remusburg after Remus. So in 1760s, Frederick the Great obviously knew this, and as a nod of respect to the brother who got killed, and Rome was not named after him, they named the palace Remusburg. And here's the last little factoid. Again, these are breadcrumbs, possible outside corroboration of interconnection across lifetimes. Frederick the Great went out and he sought out an expensive, beautiful statue that was a Roman statue that was sculpted in the 2nd century during Marcus Aurelius's lifetime. And Frederick the Great in 1760 had it placed prominently in his garden at his favorite palace, Sanssouci is the name of the palace. So there you go. Just some odd connections. Is it absolute proof? Nothing is absolute proof. But, outside confirmation, maybe, right? Here's something else. So some of you met me at the IANDS conference in August 2019, where I spoke. I spoke on the opening night, and then I spoke about six times. I did a workshop there and so forth during that 3-4 day conference in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. So my brochure's example to you is, those of you who went to the conference, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should look in the bag that they gave you. And in the outside pocket is this brochure, all right? This brochure, it's a 6-panel brochure that one of the conference organizers said to me when they scheduled me as a speaker. Oh, you have it, look at it, you have it. Beverly has it right there, that's awesome. So here's the thing, Beverly, look at this, okay? So one of the conference organizers said, Kelvin, do you have a brochure? You should bring a brochure. I said, no. She said, oh, you should definitely make a brochure. There's going to be 500 people here at the conference. So I made this brochure. And so what I did was I talked to a friend of mine, and she has a very nice brochure, a beautiful brochure. And I said, Sharon, like, how did you do this? How did you put this together? Because I am not artistic. That's not my strength, right? So she said, oh, Vistaprint. They did the whole thing. And if you pay them an extra $20, they give you a graphic designer. I'd say, what? $20 for a graphic designer? So that's what I did. So I upload on their website all the content and the pictures. And the graphic designer called, set up an appointment. He calls me up and he said, here, look, I sent you an email, blah, 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 and open it. Here's the brochure. And I said, oh, this is awesome. This is beautiful. He picked the colors and everything, okay? And he did the layout, and I said, okay, just fix the spelling of this over here, and check, move this and put a quotes here. You missed a quote there, and whatever. So minor stuff. Okay, I get off the phone with him. Now I'm in my kitchen washing my breakfast dishes after having just had this phone call with the graphic designer. While I'm washing the dishes, those of you know from what I said earlier today, I get communications from the other side. I get this communication. It's Prussian blue. I'm like, what? I just got chills. So I'm like, I'm washing the dishes. I get Prussian blue. What is Prussian blue? So I finish the dishes. I go to my computer. First, I type in Prussian blue. Is there a color called Prussian blue? Yeah, there's a color called Prussian blue. When was it created? I'm looking at the Wikipedia. I'm reading it. In the early 1700s, Prussian blue. I'm like, what? Look at the color of the Prussian uniforms right there. You see that? You see the blue there in the uniforms? Beverly, look at my brochure. And look at Beverly, look at the border around my picture on the front, and you look at the Kelvin Chin, author, meditation teacher. You see it's in a slightly different color. You see that? You know, look at the gold, the muted gold of the uniforms there of the soldiers. So I think my soldiers, some of my dead soldiers on the other side, I'm seriously mean this, were like whispering in the graphic designer's ear when they put this together. And then I didn't even connect the dots as far as where the conference was until like 3 months after the conference organizer said, yeah, we'd like you to speak here and this night and da 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 da. And I was talking to my friend George, the one who kind of helped me open up my memories back in 1977. And I told him, George, I'm speaking at this conference, International Association for Near-Death Studies. You know, it's like a cool group. You know, never spoken at any of their conferences or been to any of their conferences. And he goes, Kel, look where it is. Look at where it's being held. And I go, oh my God. He said, you know, there's a joke on the other side. You know, our friends are joking about this on the other side because those of you who know Lilia, do you know Lilia, one of the organizers of the conference? Lilia called me up. She sent me this long email trying to convince me to talk because she said, we want you to talk because I've looked at your websites and you have this different perspective on NDEs and then this and that and afterlife and blah, blah, blah. And we want a different perspective. And so she said, can you talk to me? Can I talk you into this? So she got her on the phone and I said, how did you find me? She said, I prayed to God, she said. She said, I prayed to God and I asked to be guided to somebody who would be a new speaker, not the usual person who's always speaking at the IANDS conferences before, somebody who's never spoken at the IANDS conference before, who has a unique perspective on all of this stuff. And she found me, she said. So that's what George told me. You know, there's a joke on the other side that people have been whispering into Lilia and other people's ears. King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. So there you go. Who knows, right? Coincidence? Maybe. I don't know. Memories. Let's talk about, before we close and open up to for Q&A in a second. Memories, the many ways they can come. The memories can come in many, many different ways. And this slide is going to give you an example of one. Those of you who have my book, Overcoming the Fear of Death, there's a person in there I reference a few times in some of my stories. His name is Jimmy. So his name is Jimmy Carpenter. In the book, I just put his name as Jimmy. But Jimmy was dying, and he and I were friends. And he was dying, and I moved into his house to help Donna and the family take care of him for the last month. And we turned him, and the hospice people would come in too, but they weren't sleeping overnight there. You know, so, you know, in the middle of the night or early in the morning, we'd have to turn him or help him get to the bathroom and so forth. And the point of me telling you this, that's the context. But during that month, I went to the bathroom. And the point of me telling you this is to give you an unusual way a memory popped into my mind in waking state. I went to the bathroom. That's a picture on the left. You might say, what's that? That is a picture of the bathroom rug in Donna's house, Donna and Jimmy's house. That's a picture of the bathroom rug. Now, when you look at that picture, when most people look at that picture, you probably see a design, right? On the black fabric, you see the white design and da 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 da. What do you see when you see those dots up in the top part of this round rug on the bathroom floor? You probably see dots. You might see birds. You might see constellation. You might just see dots as a pattern. I looked at it, and that's what I saw on the right side of your screen. That's what I saw. That's an F-4F Wildcat fighter plane from Second World War, Pacific Theater. I was a World War II fighter pilot. So I had already had memories before this popped into my mind. I already knew that I was a World War II fighter pilot, and I flew F-4F Wildcats off of aircraft carriers in the Pacific in the Second World War. I was blonde, blue eyes. I was Caucasian, obviously. And but fast forward to 2015, right before Jimmy died, a couple weeks before he died, I'm in the bathroom. That's what I saw. And I saw Jimmy and me flying F-4Fs in formation. That's what I saw when I saw those dots. I saw a huge formation of F-4F Wildcats flying in the sky. And Jimmy and I were flying together in formation together. So, and Jimmy, this lifetime, as I said, he died in 2015, but in this 20th century lifetime, he was a Cobra attack helicopter pilot in the Vietnam War, 2-seater gunship. So he flew in the Army this lifetime. He was in the Army. He retired from the Army. He was in it for, I don't know, 30 years or something like that. Okay? So it can come in all different ways. It surprises you in different ways, not just during meditation or after meditation or during a dream. It can be even in waking state like this. It can come in at all different times. You heard me use, I'm going to close just with a couple of tips for you. Again, reminder, follow the breadcrumbs. It happens in a non-linear way. Non-linear, not straight line, not chronological all the time. Think of it as 100 million piece jigsaw puzzle. Think of one lifetime. Think of this lifetime that you have now as Beverly, as 100 million or 100 billion. Pick a big number. It doesn't matter. It's just I just picked a big number. 100 million piece jigsaw puzzle with no picture. Now, we have the picture, Beverly, of what our life has looked like up to now, right? For me, up to 70 years old. I have the picture of what it looks like now. I don't have the picture of what it looks like after 70, right? But these other lifetimes, I don't have any box cover. I have nothing. I don't know what it looks like, right? So think of it as a jigsaw puzzle with a whole bunch of pieces. And in some of those jigsaw puzzle pieces, 3 pieces will go together. Another one, 5 pieces will work together. But those 3 and 5 don't go together, and you get another 100 pieces locked together and fit together. Whoa, I can start to see something. But they don't go with the first 3, 5, or 15 pieces or whatever, right? I have some lifetimes with 500,000, the equivalent, just in this analogy, 500,000 pieces. I have a lot of memories from some of the lifetimes, 150,000 pieces. And then I have some other lifetimes, like I have one on another planet, it's maybe 15, 20, 30 pieces, relatively speaking, not that many, in other words, right? But even if it's 500,000 pieces, look at the percent it is of 100 million. It's 0.5%. It's a tiny portion, right? It's a big number, 500,000 pieces. So it's a lot of memories, but it's still a tiny piece of the whole lifetime. It's just like this lifetime. How much do you remember everything you ate 3 weeks ago for lunch? No. Who would want to waste our time with that? It's no different from other lifetimes. There's some stuff that leaves a deep impression and other stuff doesn't. Okay? So what's the point of all of this? So what's the so what? What's the answer to so what? It's this, like we talked about earlier. Know thyself, no fear of death. Look at our emotional patterns that your past lives may open up to you, right? And personality traits. We talked about that. That's what's continuing. And it was the practical benefits that help us today from those memories. That's what's valuable, not the memory themselves. Who cares? Okay? Have fun. Live life fully now, right? It's always this. Okay, questions? Open up for questions. By the way, I teach a 6-part afterlife series. I'm not sure if I think I mentioned it to you another time, but that's the 6-part series. It's every other weekend on a Sunday. And if you miss classes, then you watch the recording afterwards. I do it live. It's live. This is the 9th time I'm doing it now. I just started, 2 weeks ago. So tomorrow is my next session. In my session 2, I'm talking about NDEs and OBEs and so forth.